Will Bitcoin be the future of global currency? Is the dollar about to crash and burn? Will China actually take over? Well, if the dollar was to crash, it will cause devaluation in lots of stock, commodities, and real estate around the world. And that's because a huge amount of value of all these commodities and assets are underpinned by the US dollar. And a crash in the US dollar would lead to a huge amount of uncertainty around the world and will ultimately have an impact on real estate values as well. There is a lot going on in the world at the moment, and do we really need to be worried about this dollar? It seems that we're at the crossroads on a whole range of fronts. Perhaps crossroads is an underestimation of where we really are. Perhaps a spaghetti junction in the middle of a metaverse better illustrates where we are at the moment, because we have lots of issues going on around the world. We have Russia and the war, we have NATO, we have global warming, we have extreme weather, we have the left and the right, we have woke and racism, socialism, capitalism, China, the USA, dollar, crypto, fake news, COVID, border control. And no matter what way you look, there is division on every front. And there is a lot of uncertainty right now. With all this uncertainty, is the dollar really under threat as the world reserve currency? Is the Chinese Yuan the biggest risk to the dollar? I'm going to explore that question and lots more, including predictions around cryptocurrency. History can predict the future, but are we doomed to repeat past mistakes? There's no guarantee history will repeat itself, but it's worth looking at. There has been a number of global reserve currencies over the last 800 years or so, starting with the Spanish, who dominated in the 13th century. The Dutch took over around the 16th century, replaced by the English in around the 18th century, and the US took advantage of a war-torn Europe, as well as a very indebted British Empire, and replaced the British pound with the dollar as the world reserve currency in 1944, and has remained to this day as the world reserve currency. If you don't know who he is by now, you should research who Ray Dalio is and read some of his books. But he did complete some amazing research on the fall and rise of empires. He analysed about 10 empires throughout history, including the Dutch, the British, USA, and this graph illustrates the rise and fall over time. Generally, each empire reigned for about 200 years or so. Dalio found that each empire had 8 important characteristics that they all shared, including power, i.e. military power, education, innovation, inventiveness, a very large share of the world's trade, as well as one major city that dominated, and very importantly, a currency that dominated world trade. Dalio's research allowed him to track the fall of empires and the rise of the next one as well. New superpowers started to rise as the current one started to fall. Dalio's research suggests that markets are all pointing to the US falling and China rising, and it's hard to argue with that conclusion. In the US, standards of education are falling behind, innovation is falling behind as well. There is political divide, the US are at a trade deficit, and in terms of military spending is far overinflated. On the other side of the curve, you have China. China is on the upturn in terms of education, innovation. They're increasing spending in military. They have an export surplus, and China are no longer copying the world in terms of innovations, and they're creating more and more inventions than the US, and are filing far more patents as well. I don't think it's hard to imagine or see that China will pass out the US as the world's largest economy over the next 10 to 20 years. But I do see one major flaw in this prediction, and that is around the control of the world's global currency reserve. I do not believe the dollar will lose its importance or its status as the world's global currency reserve to China anytime quick or ever. The dollar may have lost some of its importance over the last few years in terms of a global currency reserve. The euro has gained some momentum as a reserve, but only a very small fraction of international funds are held in euro as a reserve currency. The recent oil crisis and the war in Ukraine has led to an increased demand in dollar, as more and more people see dollar as a safe option at the moment. For a currency to be accepted as a global currency reserve, it needs a few things, mainly 3 characteristics. It needs to have an independent central bank, a liquid bond market and a military to protect that reserve, and therefore it provides a safe place to store wealth and cash for other countries. Europe, or the euro, is made up of multiple countries, therefore it is fragmented. It has a much smaller bond market. It doesn't have its own recognized army, and at the moment there is war on its doorstep, hence why there's an increased demand for a dollar. China does have its own military, but it doesn't tick a lot of the other boxes. Its central bank is not independent, and a lot of other countries would have limited confidence in holding huge amount of Japanese yen. Therefore, they wouldn't deem it safe, and while China may become the world's biggest economy, I do not see the Japanese yen replacing this dollar anytime soon. So what are the major risks for the dollar, and what could cause it to crash and burn? Probably two of the major concerns right now would be the fact that the US are running at a trade deficit and inflation, but I do not see either of those risks causing the dollar to weaken in such a way that it would lose its reserve currency status. Less confidence in the US and less confidence in the dollar may cause some investors to put some of their currency reserves into the euro or Canadian dollar or the Japanese yen. But at the moment, I don't see any of those currencies being strong enough to replace the dollar as the reserve global currency. The biggest threat to the dollar as the world reserve currency could be crypto. We're nowhere near that at the moment as a major risk, but push out the timelines a bit further and some more advances in cryptocurrencies and we could get there. And I think crypto could be the Fed's biggest concern as well. Remember Facebook and its Libra coin, which was linked to the US dollar and the euro, that got shut down very quickly, and I'm not sure the Fed really wanted Facebook and its 2 billion users moving away from the dollar. Perhaps a new cryptocurrency won't need a central bank or a military to even protect it, because people will have control and therefore they'll see it as safe. A globally accepted cryptocurrency is likely way off, but I believe it's more likely to replace the dollar as the global currency reserve far quicker than the Chinese yuan. Blockchain and crypto have a long way to go, but progress can happen quickly. The first dollar was printed in 1862, and it was nearly 80 years before the dollar became the world reserve currency. Bitcoin is only 13 years old, so who knows what will happen in another 67 years. As we sit here in this spaghetti junction in the middle of a metaverse, who knows what will happen. But I personally think that history will play out a little bit differently this time when the British took over from the Dutch and when the Americans took over from the British in terms of global superpowers and taking over the reserve currency. There was a lot of commonalities and similarities between the markets. There was a lot of similar mindsets as well, which led to an easier transition. I'm not sure the same can be said about the Chinese Communist Party. I don't think a transition would be as easy, and also there was no cryptocurrency competing with the dollar back in 1844 either. I hope this video sparked some thoughts and got you thinking. If you liked the video, give it a thumbs up, make sure you subscribe to the channel, and perhaps you might like this video over here.